Book Talk begins at 11 minutes and 54 seconds. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 630, Beyond the Noise. This episode of CraftLit was brought to you by Sydney H. Hi, Sid. A.T. Blanton, the donor of our books that are getting raffled off this month. Adita N. Hi, Adita. Marcy G. Hey, Marcy. And Shelley A. And we have a new patron this month, or this last week, which is Mary D. Thank you so much for joining us over there. Don't forget, the end of this month, we will be watching A Face in the Crowd. So anybody who has pledged at the Mina Harker level or above, you will be invited to watch that movie with us on Discord. If you have any questions about that, you can email me, Heather at craftlit.com, or Eric, ERIK, at craftlit.com, or you can post a question over on Patreon or on the Discord server. And thank you again to all of our patrons. I really, really appreciate it. Don't forget, there is a link in the show notes for our raffle this month. This is the set of Oxford Pocket Classics. They're hardbacks. They have arrived here in their beautiful box. And you can head on over through the link in the show notes to Rafflecopter. That is where we host our raffles because it allows us to give you opportunities to share the show and us opportunities to keep track of all of you and then have Rafflecopter randomly pick a winner, which is really actually kind of fun. It's very Vanna White. It's just one of those like bingo ball moments. It's great. We have had some growth in the Etsy store. We are continuing. I'm managing to post maybe 1 or 2 things a week that are new. And that's the store's name is Relentlessly Curious. And one of the things I am starting to post is prints of watercolors that I've done. I am happy enough with the quality of the paper that the prints are coming out on. So yeah, we're going to do that. And then give me some feedback. Let me know your thoughts as well if you order one of them. And I'm only planning to do 5x7 and 8x10 sized prints. If there's something else that you would want, just have to let me know. Next, we have a voicemail from Tara Worster, who has been silent for a while. And now we know why. She's been hoarding episodes of the Three Musketeers. But this week she had a very funny insight about Aiden's bar mitzvah. So we're going to play that for you.
Hello, Heather. You have my permission to use this audio on the podcast. My life has been tumultuous as of these last 6 weeks, 8 weeks, oh God, since the beginning of August. So I have not listened to the books that are current right now. I, however, have been listening to Little Woman on my 18-pin, or my, 12-pin charger iPod with the turn wheel on it still that makes the clicking noises because I am a troglodyte and I hate new electronics. But old CraftLit episodes have been such a solace to me. And one of the episodes that came up in a shuffle recently was seeing Tooth and hearing him chant Torah. And my brain clapped onto one of my oldest memories of any sort of interaction I had as a non-religious individual with biblical texts. I found a copy of tapes, Torah on tapes, and I cackled for a solid 3 minutes in a used bookstore because I realized as you listen to Torah on tapes, it unrolls like Torah whenever you read the physical copies of it. And I could not help but lose my ever-loving mind at the joke that was just waiting there for someone to find. It made my day. And it really brought me a moment of just belly laughing glee. So I would like to take a moment to thank you for sharing your big life events with us, and for sharing CraftLit with us, and for introducing all of us to these amazing books. I missed the podcast. I will get to Three Musketeers eventually, but as of right now, I am unpacking my house because I had to move house, and I'm listening to Jo cut her hair off and wishing I had more episodes to listen to. I hope you're having a great day, Heather. I will talk to you later. Bye.
I am so sorry, Tara, that you have had to move. Oof. You know I feel your pain. And I loved my old iPod. I loved my iRiver, because that's what I was listening to podcasts on back when we started. Oh, so many of you are too young to know the joy of the iRiver. You could record on it. You could load audio onto it. It was a perfect device, and it was about the size of a tube of lipsticks. And it's gone. Gone. I tried to get one on eBay a while ago, and none of the ones that I found were working. They were selling them, but not so much in a working state. All right, if you have anything to share for CraftLit listeners, 206-350-1642. And if you forget that, you can go to Linktree, that's linktr.ee/CraftLit channel. That's all one word. And from that link tree, you will find all the CraftLit links that you might possibly need, including a link to the phone number. And the last thing before we get to the book, I called this episode Beyond the Noise because I have felt like this last week there's been more noise than there has been for a while. Maybe it's just that I'm able to pay attention to a little bit more. So far, the headaches haven't been too bad this week. So, fingers crossed, we'll see how that goes. But I'm linking in the show notes to 2 different videos. The first one is this week's Beyond the Noise number 16, The Freedom to Harm. This is a series that the host of TWIV, This Week in Virology, is doing with Dr. Paul Offit, who has a Substack as well. So they do a discussion about Paul Offit's post on Substack. Why does this matter? Primary sources. We are fans of primary sources. We are not afraid of primary sources and going and looking to see what did the actual people in history write, so that we know if people are making ridiculous claims about them. I've done that several times on the podcast as bonus episodes. The senator from Maine, who in the 50s gave a fabulous anti-McCarthy speech. I did a whole episode on that because it was being misrepresented in the press. Oh, the speech was the Declaration of Conscience, and it was done in 1950 by Margaret Chase Smith. I remembered. So, primary sources don't scare us, is my point. Paul Offit, to me, is a primary source because he's one of the guys on the FDA panel who votes for whether or not vaccine boosters should be recommended or what age group should be referred to in this particular batch of vaccines. He's as close to a primary source as I'm ever going to get when it comes to this kind of stuff. It is always interesting to get some insider baseball. You get to listen to 2 experts in their field discuss problems within their field. I find it fascinating. At one point, there's a question about anti-vaxxers and the autism paper that was published in the Lancet in the 90s. Yeah. His explanation of what happened is correct, but missing enormous chunks of data. There is a vaccine video by a YouTuber, the ridiculous name. He's been doing it almost as long as I've been podcasting. So he was like 11 when he started. And so his channel is H Bomber Guy. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this guy before. If it is a not safe for work video, he is nutty at the beginning to keep people watching, and he's nutty periodically all the way through. But he is devoted to research. He cites his research, and he shows you the research so you can see the documentation for yourself, and you can see what happened in England. We don't do very well on international news, but you can see the documentary work that was done in England after that article started to make waves. Just so, again, you have access to some primary sources. I know we all make up our mind on these things, and there are lots of reasons. As Paul Offit mentions, there's about 9 million people just in the United States who cannot get vaccinated because of something going on in their system. So being respectful of that is super important. Be that as it may, I think it's a pretty important thing to know as many details as you can about this subject these days, because people are still dying and people are getting long COVID. So there it is, beyond the noise. And their podcast is like 25 minutes long. They're always very short. Paul Offit is a busy man. So that's that. Let's get to the book. All right. The first reference that we get that is obscure is a reference to the coursers of Hippolytus. Right. Sure. Because we all know exactly what he's referring to. So there was a really very famous version of the Hippolytus story that was written by the French playwright Racine in 1677. And he did the play from Phaedra's point of view. Phaedra was captured and brought to Thebes by Theseus, Hippolytus's dad. Hippolytus had a different mother. She died. And Phaedra, because gods suck, winds up being in love with Hippolytus, and it's a big disaster. And Hippolytus, whose name actually means, I did not know this before, unleasher of horses, gets dragged behind his chariot and killed because reasons. So there's a poem later talking about Hippolytus's horses with their eyes sad now and their heads hung down, seem to conform themselves to his sad thoughts. The horses themselves were very sad that Hippolytus was dead, and certainly sad that they had had a part in accidentally killing him. But that's Greek tragedy for you, right? And Roman tragedy, because Seneca did a version of Phaedra first, Euripides did Hippolytus, and then Racine did Phaedra later. It's a story people do. We did it at UCLA, and it was depressing. So the first chapter, chapter 29, is mostly about Porthos, and Porthos is Porthos, larger than life in all the ways. And that also means we haven't really heard Porthos talking a whole lot so far. Usually it's Athos or Aramis, and certainly D'Artagnan. This is a lot of Porthos talking, and it is 100% heightened language and melodrama. And so don't let your modern sensibility get in the way of enjoying Porthos being ridiculous. You are supposed to think that he's ridiculous. So enjoy. In this section, Porthos sees two different women in church. I got very confused about who was which and why that mattered. I am going to give you some information. There is a woman in a black veil who's described as being yellow, dry, and haughty. She is also the one later who beats her breast so hard doing the mea culpas in church that everybody turns to look at her. She's making a big deal about seeing Porthos. She's biting her lips to make them red, all that kind of stuff. There is another lady, a beautiful lady, who has servants with her and a red velvet cushion that she's sitting on, who is stunning. And she is there being seen. She barely does anything except just participate in church. The back and forthing of Porthos, the kind of triangulation of funny that goes on between these three people, is why I got confused. It's really, really cleverly written, but it is hard to parse when you're listening to it, I think. Porthos strokes his imperial again, his mustaches. And at one point, the term chimera is used. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. I should look that up again. And of course, the chimera was a fire-breathing female monster from mythology. She had a lion's head, a goat's body, and a serpent's tail. These are all things that cannot go together, that should not go together. But the way we often use the term chimera is according to the dictionary, an unrealized dream. And I thought, well, that's not a great definition. That's kind of missing the point. The point is that just like the parts of the chimera don't fit together, shouldn't fit together, the dream that you're having, the thing you wish could happen, it doesn't fit right. At least not with your circumstances right now. It's a chimera. It's chimerical. It's changing. It's weird. It's not going to fit in. There is a reference to the cloister at Saint Magloire, Magloire. This is kind of cool. There was a monastery in this location, and it got moved by Catherine de' Medici in 1572 to the other side of the Seine, which is kind of a long way to move an entire monastery, but I guess it was kind of in her way. But the buildings that had been part of the monastery remained. And so there were kind of these little alleyways and quiet places where you could go to not be seen. And that is exactly what's happening here. And that particular alleyway that we get the reference to was there until 1790, which is kind of cool. Mendicant is a beggar. If it is capitalized, however, Mendicant, if it's capitalized M, it is a reference to a friar, somebody who's living a monastic life, who's given up all the things that would, like a beggar, mean you have nothing. At one point, Porthos exclaims peste, P-E-S-T-E, which, if I understand this correctly, correct me if I didn't, 206-350-1642, means plague. Like, the plague, or plague on you, or pox on you. I think that's where this is going, because in the modern translation, it was translated as damn. So that's the vibe I'm getting. Then we move into chapter 30. And the first word we hit that we don't use very often, although I don't know why, is misanthropy. Misanthropy. There was a play actually, I think it was around the same time as Racine's Phaedra. There was a play called The Misanthrope, which is very funny if you ever have a chance to see it. It's lovely. Misanthropy, or being a misanthrope, means you have a hatred or distrust of humankind, all the humans. So there's misogyny aimed at women and misanthropy just aimed at everybody. Remember way back several weeks ago when D'Artagnan and Planchet were heading out to England. So they've lost everybody else. They're on their own. They get to the water. They have to go talk to the governor, and a guy gets in their way. He was the Comte de Ward, and his lackey's name was Lubin, Lubin. Just a reminder. And then the word BA is used again, and Amy filled me in on the meaning of the smell of the BA. So here is a voicemail from Amy.
Hi, Heather. This is Amy in Seattle. I am calling about episode 628 when you had mentioned the word billet, which we tend to pronounce as billet in English. In French, it's billet. And you mentioned it in an earlier episode as well. I can't remember which one, but billet in modern French means ticket. However, in this case, the way Dumas, and throughout the book so far, I think, the way Dumas is using it is as a shortened form of billet doux, which is billet -DOUX. And the billet doux is a love note. That's it. So my fellow romance readers have probably encountered it a few times, and that's where it perked my ears up. So in episode 628, when D'Artagnan is teasing Aramis about writing poems, and he goes, oh yes, verses perfumed by the odor of the billet or billet, he's referring to the perfumed love note that he brought to Aramis from his mistress in the previous chapter. That's all it is. So billet means the same thing it did earlier in the book, which is a shortened form of billet doux, a love note. I hope this helps. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
So that's marvelous. Thank you. Thank you, Amy, for helping be my memory and my dictionary. There's a word used quite a bit in the end of this chapter, soubrette, Soubrette, which is a coquettish girl, a maid. In theater, a soubrette was kind of the ingenue, the frivolous girl who's having fun on stage. And of course, Dumas would have known, it's like the Commedia dell'arte had all of their specific character types. Soubrette is like that. There's a reference to the Hotel of the Field of the Cloth of Gold. I did not know any of this history, but I have shared a link out for you because it is really quite fascinating. There was a meeting in a field kind of southeast of Calais between Henry VIII and the French king at the time, Francis I. This meeting between them, known as the Field of the Cloth of Gold, took place between the 7th of June, 1520, and the 24th of June, 1520. They thought this was going to lead to peace between the countries forever and ever. Amen. So that didn't work. But because the place was so decked out with all the king's horses and all the king's men and all the king's clothes and all of the lovely tents and accoutrements that everybody brought with them, the location wound up being referred to as the Field of Gold, or the Val d'Or, the Valley of Gold. It was hard to find this information because it appears that now there is a hotel on that site that does kind of year-round Renaissance fair-y things. It actually looked really cool, kind of like a higher class version of an American roadside attraction. If anybody has been there before, please call in or write in and let us know, heather@craftlit.com or 206-350-1642. And by the way, if you listen on the app, I think if you press the little menu on the left side, the little hamburger menu, I think one of the links is actually the phone number. So if you are on the app on your phone and you have something to say, it's like 2 clicks away being able to call. And then the last thing is a word that we've heard before. I think we've heard it before already in this book. The reference to a closet, which is just another word for study or den, a place where you would go and read and write. And that's it. All right, let's get on with chapters 29 and 30 of The Three Musketeers, written for us by Alexandre Dumas. And if you are listening to a different version of the book than the one we have here, all you have to do is fast wind to 1 hour, 1 minute, and 19 seconds. All right, here we go.
Chapter 29 of The D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Hunting for the equipments. The most preoccupied of the four friends was certainly D'Artagnan, although he, in his quality of guardsman, would be much more easily equipped than Messieurs the Musketeers, who were all of high rank. But our Gascon cadet was, as may have been observed, of a provident and almost avaricious character, and with that, explain the contradiction, so vain as almost to rival Porthos. To this preoccupation of his vanity, D'Artagnan at this moment joined an uneasiness much less selfish. Notwithstanding all his inquiries respecting Madame Bonacieux, he could obtain no intelligence of her. Monsieur de Tréville had spoken of her to the Queen. The Queen was ignorant where the mercer's young wife was, but had promised to have her sought for. But this promise was very vague, and did not at all reassure D'Artagnan. Athos did not leave his chamber. He made up his mind not to take a single step to equip himself. "We have still 15 days before us," said he to his friends. "Well, if at the end of a fortnight I have found nothing, or rather if nothing has come to find me, as I, too good a Catholic to kill myself with a pistol bullet, I will seek a good quarrel with 4 of his Eminence's guards, or with 8 Englishmen, and I will fight until one of them has killed me, which, considering the number, cannot fail to happen. It will then be said of me that I died for the king, so that I shall have performed my duty without the expense of an outfit." Porthos continued to walk about with his hands behind him, tossing his head and repeating, "I shall follow up on my idea." Aramis, anxious and negligently dressed, said nothing. It may be seen by these disastrous details that desolation reigned in the community. The lackeys, on their part, like the coursers of Hippolytus, shared the sadness of their masters. Mousqueton collected a store of crusts. Bazin, who had always been inclined to devotion, never quit the churches. Planchet watched the flight of flies. And Grimaud, whom the general distress could not induce to break the silence imposed by his master, heaved sighs enough to soften the stones. The 3 friends, for as we have said, Athos had sworn not to stir a foot to equip himself, went out early in the morning and returned late at night. They wandered about the streets, looking at the pavement as if to see whether the passengers had not left a purse behind them. They might have been supposed to be following tracks, so observant were they wherever they went. When they met, they looked desolately at one another, as much as to say, "Have you found anything?" However, as Porthos had first found an idea and had thought of it earnestly afterwards, he was the first to act. He was a man of execution, this worthy Porthos. D'Artagnan perceived him one day walking toward the church of St. Leu, and followed him instinctively. He entered after having twisted his mustache and elongated his imperial, which always announced on his part the most triumphant resolutions. As D'Artagnan took some precautions to conceal himself, Porthos believed he had not been seen. D'Artagnan entered behind him. Porthos went and leaned against the side of a pillar. D'Artagnan, still unperceived, supported himself against the other side. There happened to be a sermon which made the church very full of people. Porthos took advantage of this circumstance to ogle the women. Thanks to the cares of Mousqueton, the exterior was far from announcing the distress of the interior. His hat was a little napless, his feather was a little faded, his gold lace was a little tarnished, his laces were a trifle frayed, but in the obscurity of the church these things were not seen, and Porthos was still the handsome Porthos. D'Artagnan observed, on the bench nearest to the pillar against which Porthos leaned, a sort of ripe beauty, rather yellow and rather dry, but erect and haughty under her black hood. The eyes of Porthos were furtively cast upon this lady, and then roved about at large over the nave. On her side, the lady, who from time to time blushed, darted with the rapidity of lightning a glance toward the inconstant Porthos, and then immediately the eyes of Porthos wandered anxiously. It was plain that this mode of proceeding piqued the lady in the black hood, for she bit her lips till they bled, scratched the end of her nose, and could not sit still in her seat. Porthos, seeing this, retwisted his mustache, elongated his imperial a second time, and began to make signals to a beautiful lady who was near the choir, and who not only was a beautiful lady, but still further, no doubt, a great lady, for she had behind her a Negro boy who had brought the cushion on which she knelt, and a female servant who held the emblazoned bag in which was placed the book from which she read the Mass. The lady with the black hood followed through all their wanderings the looks of Porthos, and perceived that they rested upon the lady with the velvet cushion, the little Negro, and the maidservant. During this time Porthos played close. It was almost imperceptible motions of his eyes, fingers placed upon the lips, little assassinating smiles, which really did assassinate the disdained beauty. Then she cried, "Ahem!" under cover of the mea culpa, striking her breast so vigorously that everybody, even the lady with the red cushion, turned round toward her. Porthos paid no attention. Nevertheless, he understood it all, but was deaf. The lady with the red cushion produced a great effect, for she was very handsome, upon the lady with the black hood, who saw in her rival really to be dreaded, a great effect upon Porthos, who thought her much prettier than the lady with the black hood, a great effect upon D'Artagnan, who recognized in her the Lady of Meung, of Calais, and of Dover, whom his persecutor, the man with the scar, had saluted by the name of Milady. D'Artagnan, without losing sight of the lady of the red cushion, continued to watch the proceedings of Porthos, which amused him greatly. He guessed that the lady of the black hood was the procurator's wife of the Rue Aux, which was the more probable from the church of St. Leu being not far from that locality. He guessed likewise by induction that Porthos was taking his revenge for the defeat of Chantilly, when the procurator's wife had proved so refractory with respect to her purse. Amid all this, D'Artagnan remarked also that not one countenance responded to the gallantries of Porthos. There were only chimeras and illusions, but for real love, for true jealousy, is there any reality except illusions and chimeras? The sermon over, the procurator's wife advanced toward the holy font. Porthos went before her, and instead of a finger dipped his whole hand in. The procurer's wife smiled, thinking that it was for her Porthos had put himself to this trouble, but she was cruelly and promptly undeceived. When she was only about 3 steps from him, he turned his head round, fixing his eyes steadfastly upon the lady with the red cushion, who had risen and was approaching, followed by her black boy and her woman. When the lady of the red cushion came close to Porthos, Porthos drew his dripping hand from the font. The fair worshipper touched the great hand of Porthos with her delicate fingers, smiled, made the sign of the cross, and left the church. This was too much for the procurator's wife. She doubted not there was an intrigue between this lady and Porthos. If she had been a great lady, she would have fainted, but as she was only a procurator's wife, she contented herself saying to the Musketeer with concentrated fury, "Hey, Monsieur Porthos, you don't offer me any holy water?" Porthos, at the sound of that voice, started like a man awakened from a sleep of 100 years. "Madame," cried he, "is that you? How is your husband, our dear Monsieur Coquenard? Is he still as stingy as ever? Where can my eyes have been not to have seen you during the 2 hours of this sermon?" "I was within 2 paces of you, monsieur," replied the procurator's wife. "But you did not perceive me because you had no eyes but for the pretty lady to whom you just now gave the holy water." Porthos pretended to be confused. "Ah," said he, "you have remarked?" "I must have been blind not to have seen." "Yes," said Porthos, "that is a duchess of my acquaintance, whom I have great trouble to meet on account of the jealousy of her husband, and who sent me word that she should come today to this poor church, buried in this vile quarter, solely for the sake of seeing me." "Monsieur Porthos," said the procurator's wife, "will you have the kindness to offer me your arm for 5 minutes? I have something to say to you." "Certainly, madame," said Porthos, winking to himself, as a gambler does who laughs at the dupe he is about to pluck. At that moment D'Artagnan passed in pursuit of Milady. He cast a passing glance at Porthos and beheld this triumphant look. "Aha!" said he, reasoning to himself according to the strangely easy morality of that gallant period. There is one who will be equipped in good time." Porthos, yielding to the pressure of the arm of the procurator's wife, as a bark yields to the rudder, arrived at the cloister Saint Magloire, a little frequented passage, enclosed with a turnstile at each end. In the daytime nobody was seen there but mendicants devouring their crusts and children at play.
"Ah, Monsieur Porthos!"
cried the procurator's wife when she was assured that no one who was a stranger to the population of the locality could either see or hear her.
"Ah, Monsieur Porthos, you are a great conqueror, as it appears."
"I, madame?" said Porthos, drawing himself up proudly. "How so?"
"The signs just now, and the holy water. But that must be a princess, at least, that lady with her Negro boy and her maid."
"My God, madame, you are deceived," said Porthos. "She is simply a duchess."
"And that running footman who waited at the door, and that carriage with a coachman in grand livery who sat waiting on his seat?"
Porthos had seen neither the footman nor the carriage, but with the eye of a jealous woman, Madame Coquenard had seen everything. Porthos regretted that he had not at once made the lady of the red cushion a princess.
"Ah, you are quite the pet of the ladies, Monsieur Porthos,"
resumed the procurator's wife with a sigh. "Well," responded Porthos, "you may imagine with the physique with which nature has endowed me, I am not in want of good luck."
"Good Lord, how quickly men forget!"
cried the procurator's wife, raising her eyes toward heaven. "Less quickly than the women, it seems to me," replied Porthos. "For I, madame, I may say I was your victim. When wounded, dying, I was abandoned by the surgeons. I, the offspring of a noble family, who placed reliance upon your friendship. I was near dying of my wounds at first, and of hunger afterward, in a beggarly inn at Chantilly, without you ever deigning once to reply to the burning letters I addressed to you."
"But, Monsieur Porthos,"
murmured the procurator's wife, who began to feel that, to judge by the conduct of the great ladies of the time, she was wrong. "I, who sacrificed for you the Baronne de—"
"I know it well."
"The Comtesse de—"
"Monsieur Porthos, be generous."
"You are right, madame, I will not finish."
"But it was my husband who would not hear of lending."
"Madame Coquenard," said Porthos, "remember the first letter you wrote me, and which I preserve engraved in my memory." The procurator's wife uttered a groan.
"Besides," said she, "the sum you required me to borrow was rather large."
"Madame Coquenard, I gave you the preference. I had but to write to the duchess, but I won't repeat her name, for I am incapable of compromising a woman. But this I know, that I had but to write to her, and she would have sent me 1,500. This procurator's wife shed a tear.
"Monsieur Porthos," said she, "I can assure you that you have severely punished me, and if in the time to come you should find yourself in a similar situation, you have but to apply to me."
"Fie, madame, fie!" said Porthos, as if disgusted. "Let us not talk about money, if you please. It is humiliating."
"Then you no longer love me?"
said the procurator's wife, slowly and sadly. Porthos maintained a majestic silence.
"And that is the only reply you make? Alas, I understand."
"Think of the offense you have committed toward me, madame. It remains here," said Porthos, placing his hand on his heart and pressing it strongly.
"I will repair it. Indeed I will, my dear Porthos."
"Besides, what did I ask of you?" resumed Porthos with a movement of the shoulders full of good fellowship. "A loan, nothing more. After all, I am not an unreasonable man. I know you are not rich, Madame Coquenard, and that your husband is obliged to bleed his poor clients to squeeze a few paltry crowns from them. Oh, if you were a duchess, a marchioness, or a countess, it would be quite a different thing, but it would be unpardonable." The procurator's wife was piqued.
"Pleased to know, Monsieur Porthos," said she, "that my strong-box, the strong-box of a procurator's wife though it may be, is better filled than those of your affected minxes."
"That doubles the offense," said Porthos, disengaging his arm from that of the procurator's wife. "For if you are rich, Madame Coquenard, then there is no excuse for your refusal."
"When I said rich," replied the procurator's wife, who saw that she had gone too far, "you must not take the word literally. I am not precisely rich, though I am pretty well off."
"Hold, madame," said Porthos. "Let us say no more upon the subject. I beg of you. You have misunderstood me. All sympathy is extinct between us."
"Ingrate that you are!"
"Ah, I advise you to complain," said Porthos.
"Begone, then, to your beautiful duchess. I will detain you no longer."
"And she is not to be despised, in my opinion."
"Now, Monsieur Porthos, once more, and this is the last. Do you love me still?"
"Ah, madame," said Porthos in the most melancholy tone he could assume, "when we are about to enter upon a campaign in which my presentiments tell me I shall be killed."
"Oh, don't talk of such things!"
cried the procurator's wife, bursting into tears. "Something whispers me so," continued Porthos, becoming more and more melancholy.
"Rather say that you have a new love."
"Not so. I speak frankly to you. No object affects me, and I even feel here, at the bottom of my heart, something which speaks for you. But in 15 days, as you know, or as you do not know, this fatal campaign is to open. I shall be fearfully preoccupied with my outfit. Then I must make a journey to see my family in the lower part of Brittany to obtain the sum necessary for my departure."
Porthos observed a last struggle between love and avarice.
"And as," continued he, "the duchess whom you saw at the church has estates near to those of my family, we mean to make the journey together. Journeys, you know, appear much shorter when we travel two in company."
"Have you no friends in Paris, then, Monsieur Porthos?"
said the procurator's wife. "I thought I had," said Porthos, resuming his melancholy air, "but I have been taught my mistake."
"You have some?" cried the procurator's wife in a transport that surprised even herself. "Come to our house tomorrow. You are the son of my aunt, consequently my cousin. You come from Noyon, in Picardy. You have several lawsuits and no attorney. Can you recall all that?"
"Perfectly, madame."
"Come at dinner time."
"Very well."
"And be upon your guard before my husband, who is rather shrewd, notwithstanding his 76 years."
76 years? Peste, that's a fine age," replied Porthos.
"A great age, you mean, Monsieur Porthos. Yes, the poor man may be expected to leave me a widow any hour," continued she, throwing a significant glance at Porthos. "Fortunately, by our marriage contract, the survivor takes everything."
"All?"
"Yes, all."
"You are a woman of precaution, I see, my dear Madame Coquenard," said Porthos, squeezing the hand of the procurator's wife tenderly.
"We are then reconciled, dear Monsieur Porthos?" said she, simpering.
"For life," replied Porthos in the same manner.
"Till we meet again, then, dear traitor."
"Till we meet again, my forgetful charmer."
"Tomorrow, my angel."
"Tomorrow, flame of my life."
End of chapter 29. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 30 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson.
This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. D'Artagnan and the Englishman. D'Artagnan followed Milady without being perceived by her. He saw her get into her carriage and heard her order the coachman to drive to Saint-Germain. It was useless to try keep pace on foot with a carriage drawn by two powerful horses. D'Artagnan therefore returned to the Rue Férou. In the Rue de Seine he met Planchet, who had stopped before the house of a pastry cook and was contemplating with ecstasy a cake of the most appetizing appearance. He ordered him to go and saddle two horses in Monsieur de Tréville's stables, one for himself, D'Artagnan, and one for Planchet, and bring them to Athos's place. Once for all, Tréville had placed his stable at D'Artagnan's service. Planchet proceeded toward the Rue de Colombier and D'Artagnan toward the Rue Férou. Athos was at home, emptying sadly a bottle of the famous Spanish wine he had brought back with him from his journey into Picardy. He made a sign for Grimaud to bring a glass for D'Artagnan, and Grimaud obeyed as usual. D'Artagnan related to Athos all that had passed at the church between Porthos and the procurator's wife, and how their comrade was probably by that time in a fair way to be equipped. "As for me," replied Athos to this recital, "I am quite at my ease. It will not be women that will defray the expense of my outfit." "Handsome, well-bred, and noble lord as you are, my dear Athos, neither princesses nor queens would be secure from your amorous solicitations." "How young this D'Artagnan is," said Athos, shrugging his shoulders, and he made a sign to Grimaud to bring another bottle. At that moment Planchet put his head modestly in at the half-open door and told his master that the horses were ready. "What horses?" asked Athos. "Two horses that Monsieur de Tréville lends me at my pleasure, and with which I am now going to take a ride to Saint-Germain." "Well, and what are you going to do at Saint-Germain?" then demanded Athos. Then D'Artagnan described the meeting which he had had at the church, and how he had found that lady, who with the signor in the black cloak and with the scar near his temple filled his mind constantly. "That is to say, you are in love with this lady as you were with Madame Bonacieux," said Athos, shrugging his shoulders contemptuously as if he pitied human weakness. "I? Not at all," said D'Artagnan. "I am only curious to unravel the mystery to which she is attached. I do not know why, but I imagine that this woman, wholly unknown to me as she is, and wholly unknown to her as I am, has an influence over my life." "Well, perhaps you are right," said Athos. "I do not know a woman that is worth the trouble of being sought for when she is once lost. Madame Bonacieux is lost. So much the worse for her if she is found." "No, Athos, no, you are mistaken," said D'Artagnan. "I love my poor Constance more than ever, and if I knew the place in which she is, were it at the end of the world, I would go to free her from the hands of her enemies. But I am ignorant. All my researches have been useless. What is to be said? I must divert my attention." "Amuse yourself with Milady, my dear D'Artagnan. I wish you may with all my heart, if that will amuse you." "Hear me, Athos," said D'Artagnan. "Instead of shutting yourself up here as if you were under arrest, get on horseback and come and take a ride with me to Saint-Germain." "My dear fellow," said Athos, "I ride horses when I have any. When I have none, I go afoot." "Well," said D'Artagnan, smiling at the misanthropy of Athos, which from any other person would have offended him, "I ride what I can get. I am not so proud as you. So, au revoir, dear Athos." "Au revoir," said the Musketeer, making a sign to Grimaud to uncork the bottle he had just brought. D'Artagnan and Planchet mounted and took the road to Saint-Germain. All along the road, what Athos had said respecting Madame Bonacieux recurred to the mind of the young man. Although D'Artagnan was not of a very sentimental character, the mercer's pretty wife had made a real impression upon his heart. As he said, he was ready to go to the end of the world to seek her, but the world, being round, has many ends, so that he did not know which way to turn. Meantime, he was going to try to find out Milady. Milady had spoken to the man in the black cloak. Therefore she knew him. Now, in the opinion of D'Artagnan, it was certainly the man in the black cloak who had carried off Madame Bonacieux the second time, as he had carried her off the first. D'Artagnan then only half lied, which is lying but little, when he said that by going in search of Milady, he at the same time went in search of Constance. Thinking of all this, and from time to time giving a touch of the spur to the horse, D'Artagnan completed his short journey and arrived at Saint-Germain. He had just passed by the pavilion in which 10 years later Louis XIV was born. He rode up a very quiet street, looking to the right and left to see if he could catch any vestige of his beautiful Englishwoman, when from the ground floor of a pretty house, which according to the fashion of the time had no window toward the street, he saw a face peep out, with which he thought he was acquainted. This person walked along the terrace, which was ornamented with flowers. Planchet recognized him first. "Eh, monsieur," said he, addressing D'Artagnan, "don't you remember that face which is blinking yonder?" "No," said D'Artagnan, "and yet I am certain it is not the first time I have seen that visage." "Parbleu, I believe it is not," said Planchet. "Why, it is poor Lubin, the lackey of the Comte de Wardes, he whom you took such good care of a month ago at Calais, on the road to the governor's country house." "So it is," said D'Artagnan. "I know him now. Do you think he would recollect you?" "My faith, monsieur, he was in such trouble that I doubt if he can have retained a very clear recollection of me." "Well, go and talk with the boy," said D'Artagnan, "and make out, if you can, from his conversation whether his master is dead." Planchet dismounted and went straight up to Lubin, who did not at all remember him, and the two lackeys began to chat with the best understanding possible, while D'Artagnan turned the two horses into a lane, went round the house, and came back to watch the conference from behind a hedge of filberts. At the end of an instant's observation, he heard the noise of a vehicle and saw Milady's carriage stop opposite to him. He could not be mistaken. Milady was in it. D'Artagnan leaned upon the neck of his horse in order that he might see without being seen. Milady put her charming blonde head out the window and gave her orders to her maid. The latter, a pretty girl of about 20 or 22 years, active and lively, the true soubrette of a great lady, jumped from the step upon which, according to the custom of the time, she was seated, and took her way toward the terrace upon which D'Artagnan had perceived Lubin. D'Artagnan followed the soubrette with his eyes and saw her go toward the terrace, but it happened that someone in the house called Lubin, so that Planchet remained alone, looking in all directions for the road where D'Artagnan had disappeared. The maid approached Planchet, whom she took for Lubin, and holding out a little billet to him, said, "For your master?" "For my master?" replied Planchet, astonished. "Yes, and important. Take it quickly." Thereupon she ran toward the carriage, which had turned round toward the way it came, jumped upon the step, and the carriage drove off. Planchet turned and returned the billet. Then, accustomed to passive obedience, he jumped down from the terrace, ran toward the lane, and at the end of 20 paces met D'Artagnan, who, having seen all, was coming to him. "For you, monsieur," said Planchet, presenting the billet to the young man. "For me?" said D'Artagnan. "Are you sure of that?" "Pardieu, monsieur, I can't be more sure. The soubrette said, 'For your master.' I have no other master but you, so a pretty little lass, my faith, is that soubrette." D'Artagnan opened the letter and read these words. "A person who takes more interest in you than she is willing to confess wishes to know on what day it will suit you to walk in the forest. Tomorrow at the Hotel Field of the Cloth of Gold, a lackey in black and red will wait for your reply." "Oh," said D'Artagnan, "this is rather warm. It appears that Milady and I are anxious about the health of the same person. Well, Planchet, how is the good Monsieur de Wardes? He is not dead, then?" "No, monsieur. He is as well as a man can be with 4 sword wounds in his body, for you without question inflicted 4 upon the dear gentleman, and he is still very weak, having lost almost all his blood.
As I said, monsieur, Lubin did not know me and told me our adventure from one end to the other. Well done, Planchet. You are the king of lackeys. Now jump onto your horse and let us overtake the carriage. This did not take long. At the end of 5 minutes, they perceived the carriage drawn up by the roadside. A cavalier, richly dressed, was close to the door. The conversation between Milady and the cavalier was so animated that D'Artagnan stopped on the other side of the carriage without anyone but the pretty soubrette perceiving his appearance. The conversation took place in English, a language which D'Artagnan could not understand, but by the accent of the young man plainly saw that the beautiful Englishwoman was in a great rage. She terminated it by an action which left no doubt as to the nature of this conversation. This was a blow with her fan, applied with such force that the little feminine weapon flew into 1,000 pieces. The cavalier laughed aloud, which appeared to exasperate Milady still more. D'Artagnan thought this was the moment to interfere. He approached the other door and, taking off his hat respectfully, said, "Madame, will you permit me to offer you my services? It appears to me that this cavalier has made you very angry. Speak one word, madame, and I take upon myself to punish him for his want of courtesy." At the first word, Milady turned, looking at the young man with astonishment, and when he had finished, she said in very good French, "Monsieur, I should with great confidence place myself under your protection if the person whom I quarreled were not my brother." "Ah, excuse me then," said D'Artagnan. "You must be aware that I was ignorant of that, madame." "What is that stupid fellow troubling himself about?" cried the cavalier whom Milady had designated as her brother, stooping down to the height of the coach window. "Why does he not go about his business?" "Stupid fellow yourself," said D'Artagnan, stooping in his turn on the neck of his horse and answering on his side through the carriage window. "I do not go on because it pleases me to stop here." The cavalier addressed some words in English to his sister. "I speak to you in French," said D'Artagnan. "Be kind enough, then, to reply to me in the same language. You are Madame's brother, I learn. Be it so, but, fortunately, you are not mine." It might be thought that Milady, timid as women are in general, would have interposed in this commencement of mutual provocations in order to prevent the quarrel from going too far. But on the contrary, she threw herself back in her carriage and called out coolly to the coachman, "Go on, home." The pretty soubrette cast an anxious glance at D'Artagnan, whose good looks seemed to have made an impression on her. The carriage went on and left the two men facing each other. No material obstacle separated them. The cavalier made a movement as if to follow the carriage, but D'Artagnan, whose anger already excited, was much increased by recognizing in him the Englishman of Amiens who had won his horse and had been very near winning his diamond of Athos, caught at his bridle and stopped him. "Well, monsieur," said he, "you appear to be more stupid than I am, for you forget there is a little quarrel to arrange between us two." "Ah," said the Englishman, "is it you, my master? It seems you must always be playing some game or other." "Yes, and that reminds me that I have a revenge to take. We will see, my dear monsieur, if you can handle a sword as skillfully as you can a dice-box." "You see plainly that I have no sword," said the Englishman. "Do you wish to play the braggart with an unarmed man?" "I hope you have a sword at home, but at all events I have two, and if you like I will throw with you for one of them." "Needless," said the Englishman. "I am well furnished with such playthings." "Very well, my worthy gentleman," replied D'Artagnan. "Pick out the longest and come and show it to me this evening." "Where, if you please?" "Behind the Luxembourg. That's a charming spot for such amusements as the one I propose to you." "That will do. I will be there." "Your hour?" 6 o'clock. "Apropos, you probably have one or two friends." "I have 3 who would be honored by joining in the sport with me." "3? Marvelous! That falls out oddly. 3 is just my number." "Now, then, who are you?" asked the Englishman. "I am Monsieur d'Artagnan, a Gascon gentleman serving in the King's Musketeers. And you? I am Lord de Winter, Baron Sheffield.
Well, then, I am your servant, Monsieur Baron, said D'Artagnan, though you have names rather difficult to recollect. And touching his horse with the spur, he cantered back to Paris. As he was accustomed to do in all cases of any consequence, D'Artagnan went straight to the residence of Athos. He found Athos reclining upon a large sofa, where he was waiting, as he said, for his outfit to come and find him. He related to Athos all that had passed except the letter to Monsieur de Wardes. Athos was delighted to find he was going to fight an Englishman. We might say that was his dream. They immediately sent their lackeys for Porthos and Aramis, and on their arrival made them acquainted with the situation. Porthos drew his sword from the scabbard and made passes at the wall, springing back from time to time and making contortions like a dancer. Aramis, who was constantly at work at his poem, shut himself up in Athos' closet and begged not to be disturbed before the moment of drawing swords. Athos, by signs, desired Grimaud to bring another bottle of wine. D'Artagnan employed himself in arranging a little plan, of which we shall hereafter see the execution, and which promised him some agreeable adventure, as might be seen by the smiles which from time to time passed over his countenance, whose thoughtfulness they animated. End of chapter 30. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia.
Okay, so I warned you about Porthos and the melodrama. I loved so much of it, but I especially loved him thinking, darn it, I should have told the procurer's wife, the lawyer's wife, whose name is Madame Coquenard, I should have told her that Milady was a princess instead of just a duchess. I could have gotten more money out of her. And they have several different leaving moments. I who have sacrificed this woman, that woman, this other woman. I know. But my favorite part was the part that, for me, read like Madeline Kahn in Young Frankenstein.
Oh, my sweet darling. Oh, my dearest love. I'll count the hours that you're away.
Oh, darling, so will I.
Not on the lips.
What?
I'm going to that party at Nana and Nikki's later. I don't want to smear my lipstick.
Oh.
You understand.
Of course.
All aboard!
Oh, dear.
Well, I guess this is it.
Freddie, darling. Well, how can I say in a few minutes what it's taken me a lifetime to understand?
Won't you try?
All right. You've got it, mister. I'm yours, all of me. What else can I say?
My sweet love.
The hair. Just been said.
Sorry.
The hair.
Sorry.
I hope you like old-fashioned weddings.
I prefer old-fashioned wedding night.
You're incorrigible.
Does that mean you love me?
You bet your boots it does.
Oh, my only love.
Taffeta, darling.
Taffeta, sweetheart.
No, the dress is taffeta. It wrinkles so easily.
Oh.
All aboard!
Oh, there's that horrid man again. Oh, hurry now, before I make a fool of myself. Ah, the nails! Oh.
Sorry. Goodbye, darling.
Goodbye, Freddie.
And you know me, a day with a reference to Young Frankenstein is a good day indeed. So I have a question to pose to you. D'Artagnan has Planchet go and speak to the Comte de Wardes' lackey, Lubin, to find out if the Count is still alive. This is a really interesting thing to have happen in this chapter. And I was thinking, is this Dumas letting us know that D'Artagnan's really been feeling badly about having stabbed the guy 4 times? It's not like it was an accident. It seems like an interesting way for him to have phrased it. And it is phrased exactly the same way in both the modern version and the Victorian version. So it's kind of interesting. There could be another reason. But D'Artagnan so far doesn't seem to be the kind of guy who's, digging little grooves in the scabbard, for how many kills he's gotten. He doesn't seem that type to me. So I thought that was interesting. And before I'd mentioned the Commedia dell'arte and the way that style of kind of traditional theater, common people, everybody knew what they were watching theater was melodrama. The error of the letter, the having the maid hand off the letter to the wrong person, that is a trope that happens all the time in these kinds of stories. Also, I was really glad I didn't have any liquid in my mouth when Lord de Winter said, "What is this stupid fellow troubling himself about?" And D'Artagnan's next line is, "Stupid fellow yourself." I love Dumas' dialogue so much. He is so much fun. In the modern translation, instead of stupid fellow, it was translated as featherbrain. If anybody has this book in French, I would be fascinated to know what the word is in French, the actual word. Because that's stupid fellow and featherbrain. I mean, obviously they're related, but they're very different. So, love it. I also thought it was very interesting that D'Artagnan doesn't tell Athos about the letter that was mistakenly given to him. I think that's going to have ripple effects as we move forward. All right. As of the end of this chapter, if I counted correctly, we have 15 days until they're going to head off to battle. Of course, it does take a while for people to get armies together because there were no standing armies at the time. So this amount of delay, knowing that they are going to go fight, it's just like two football teams. You know, you practice and you get your shoulder pads and suit up and then go have at it with each other. They're doing the same thing. So we've got 15 days until that's going to happen. All right. I think that's it. Have a great week. I will talk to you soon. You take care of yourself. Have a great one. Bye-bye. A big thanks to all the CraftLit listeners who support the show by being a premium audio member via craftlit.com/premium or via patreon.com/craftlit. Your support for the show is what's kept us going since 2006. If you feel like getting free audio pretty much every week, please consider supporting the show by heading over to patreon.com/craftlit and pledging what you feel the show is worth to you. If you can't support the show that way, consider leaving a review at iTunes or at our facebook.com/craftlit page, or follow at CraftLit on Twitter and share the show with your followers too. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.